Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. We're reporting from the Small Cells World Summit 2015 here in London's Docklands at Excel, and I'm talking with Stephane Daeuble, who is the head of Small Cells HetNet product marketing at Nokia. Stephane, welcome. I'd like to begin by asking you this. Small cells aren't new. They've been around for quite a while now. It may or may not be taking longer than anticipated for them to reach their potential, and we'll come to that in a moment. But first of all, they've gone through several iterations and adaptations, and where do you expect small cell technology, given its background, to be in 5 years' time? And the reason I'm asking you this is we're midway through 2015. Generally in the industry, we don't look much more than a year and a half ahead, because in the past we've not been able to. It's a very dynamic industry, things change very quickly and so on. Suddenly there's a focus way down the line to 2020, maybe because there's all the talk about Network 2020 or the 2020 network, plus factors such as virtualization, cloud, transformation of the network, all that, SDN, NFV, and of course 5G. So from that perspective, where do you think we're going to be 4.5, 5 years from now?
Well, small cell have been a long time coming, and I think you're right. But we need to remember that small cell have been deployed for at least 20 years. They've been serving as coverage hole fillers for quite a while. More recently they've been used in home or small enterprise with femto solution. And what we see in the future is small cell have a key role to play to handle the capacity requirement, but also the increase in user experience that people expect. In particular for LTE, we see small cell as a critical element because people are now starting to be used to LTE performance outdoor. They haven't got that yet in the indoor location. So we see one of the big key focus for operators going forward is deploying a lot of small cell in those public indoor locations to bring a lot better performance. So I think that's probably one of the angle. The other one is outdoor. In outdoor, there's only so much macro cell that you can deploy. Micro cell's got a lot of potential for upgrade before you need small cell. But we're now reaching a point where the operator are finding it easier to bring small cell, and small cell, when deployed in hotspot location, do bring very good cost per bit compared to macro cells. So that's another area. The third one is special events. More and more events like Formula One Grand Prix or concerts or stadium. We see a lot of people using their devices to film videos, to uplink photos and things like that. And in some recent coverage, we've done the Formula One Grand Prix in Shanghai with our solution, and we saw tremendous amount of traffic on our small cells. So that is another angle we're seeing as well. And finally, just pure coverage. Coverage issues are there in many places, and small cell will continue to have a key role to play in that area. And then probably the final thing is when you take a look at indoor location, the traditional approach has been using distributed antenna system or DAS system, and that has been a very good solution for extremely large building, but hasn't got a very good return on investment for smaller building. And this is also where small cell will help bring better coverage in indoor location for the smaller buildings.
Thank you. I have to ask you this. You will remember 2-3 years ago, there was an enormous amount of hype about small cell in the urban environment. Mm-hmm. It hasn't happened. It's happened in residential in the home. It's happened very much in the enterprise. It's happened in rural environments, and to some extent it's happening in remote environments. But the area and what was regarded as being the greatest promise, urban deployment, simply hasn't happened. Why not?
Well, I think you need to look at markets. You're probably correct if you look at Europe. Europe is in a condition where the operators got reasonable amount of spectrum. They've been reasonably late to LTE as well. And the density of people is not that great. The UK, obviously, with London's a very, very large city. But if you look at the other places, the density of people is not that high. If you take a look at other markets, such as Asia or North America, the market is such that the density of people is huge, the spectrum is limited, and that also drives a lot more deployments of small cell earlier than what we may have seen in Europe. So we've got plenty of use cases in places such as China or even India because of limited spectrum requirements. Although not a very mature market, there is clearly some key needs for outdoor small cell. So in those markets, we are starting to deploy quite a large number of small cell to deal with the hotspot location, and as simple as that. So I think you need to look at overall macroeconomics, the spectrum condition, and then each market is very different. But in that regards, we are seeing now those outdoor small cell being deployed, and even in some market, we are also seeing those small small cell, being deployed to densify the hotspot, making larger hot zones as well.
So urban small cells are on their way at last,
Yes.
and the barriers are coming down, albeit rather later than anticipated. You talked about use cases. How strong are those use cases? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing some, pretty interesting use cases. So, beyond the capacity, there's also the high rise. A lot of high rise gets a decent coverage from the macro from 0 to 20th floor. But in plenty of locations, you've got buildings that go 60, 100 and beyond. In those places, you have no coverage at all whatsoever. So we've seen, for example, in some Asian market, operator using small cell, pointing at this higher level buildings just to provide, LTE coverage in those places. That's an interesting one. The other one is more and more people uses their phone in their car when they drive in a car park, and in the grand car park there's no coverage. Again, that's where small cell can help. And there's other cases like in shopping mall, for example. Most shopping mall are pretty large environment where there's already a DAS system or macro system deployed. But if you take a look at the restaurant court where all the restaurants are, it's normally in one area. The DAS is not sufficient
Usually
for
in the
capacity.
basement or at the top.
Oh, at the top. And that's another area where a lot of the operators have been deploying small cell to complement that system and bring additional LTE capacity to have a good user experience in those places. So we're seeing plenty of different ones, and I've talked about special events before. That is really one of the very big things we're seeing with small cell, and it's a good way for operators to play with small cell, understand the barrier, and realize actually when you are putting your head to it, you can solve those problems. Backhaul, sites, interference management, all those things can be solved. And actually the small cell have evolved a lot over the last few years as well. So the technology in them make them also a lot easier to deploy, a lot more tolerant in terms of backhaul also, and work great underneath macro cells, even of other vendors. So really we've gone a lot further in the last few years.
Good point. I like that. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about one of the sticky parts of things at the moment. One of the controversies, which is what's being generically referred to as LTEU or LAA in standard talk, and that, of course, is LTE across the public spectrum. How do you think LTEU should be viewed? And let me put it into context for you, because it seems to me there are two sides to the argument here, and I've heard them both rehearsed time and again. One, the critics say, well, this is typical, this is a big telco attempt to wrest control of competition over unlicensed spectrum from other players and keep it for themselves for as long as possible. The others, who are more pro the LTEU, say, well, yes, you can understand why the big operators would want to leverage as much as they can out of it, but in the long term it's going to be a user-friendly way of aggregating data to provide a better service to users. Where do you sit on this? Are you on the fence, or do you take a consistently solid viewpoint?
I would say we're on the fence because as a vendor of Wi-Fi solution as well, we cannot just go in a market and disrupt completely the installed Wi-Fi access point, the Wi-Fi operators, all the Wi-Fi users as well. So in that regards, we are working extremely hard in the standard to ensure that solutions such as LTU or LAA, as it's called now, license assisted access, doesn't disrupt the existing Wi-Fi networks. So that's one thing. But I think, we've got to go back to the base of it. What's driving really this approach in the standard is the fact that operators will need a lot more spectrum to support the capacity going forward as they move towards 5G. So clearly that 500 megahertz of spectrum in the 5 gigahertz is a key asset. Okay. The other thing we need to bear in mind is many operators have played with Wi-Fi, and while they love the value of Wi-Fi, there's also some challenges around Wi-Fi that still haven't been sorted totally. Traffic steering, is one key element on Wi-Fi and is extremely difficult to implement. And many of us have experienced, at trade show, the Wi-Fi then stop working and go back to 3G or LTE.
Sure enough.
So there's an area where we try to find a lot of innovative means to make it happen. But the Wi-Fi standard are a little bit different than 3GPP. And it's sometimes you find solution that only works with certain devices or not others, because some vendors support some ways of traffic steering such as ANDSF and others don't. Yeah. So this LTEU is effectively trying to bring the benefit that Wi-Fi can bring without some of the issue. And with that, effectively LTE is the baseline carrier that will provide guaranteed performance. And then when you are in the coverage of Wi-Fi or LTE in the unlicensed spectrum, you will effectively get a boost. But one thing we shouldn't forget is there are effectively another alternative in the standard also being looked at called LWA, LTE Wi-Fi aggregation, which is an alternative approach where rather than using LTE in the unlicensed spectrum, we'll keep Wi-Fi in the licensed spectrum, but Wi-Fi will be controlled by the LTE node. So effectively all the control channel will go through that and will serve the same thing. And I would say the debate is still out there. Some operators are more looking at LAA, some other are more looking at LWA. And at Nokia, we will support both. So the standard are still taking, a lot of work still needs to happen in the standard. So at this moment, we are contributing to both the standard, and we'll see where the market will go. But in both cases, it's essential for the operators to be able to access this spectrum, whether they do it with Wi-Fi, LWA, or with LAA. That will help them provide good service going forward as we move to 5G and as we move to what we call the evolution to ultra-dense networks, where small cell will have a key role. With that additional spectrum, those small cells will be more efficient and provide even better service. So we think it's critical for the environment.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so I'll ask a last question to you, Stephane. Well, you mentioned 5G in the last response there. How important do you think small cells are going to be in a heterogeneous environment in which 5G operates?
Well, I think, again, there's a lot of things that still need to happen on 5G, but what we're seeing in 5G as really, there are two elements of it. There's what we call the wide area networks, which initially will remain LTE and all the evolution of LTE. Yeah. And the standard right now on 5G are focusing really on the small cells, really. I mean, there are no other ways to densify the networks to bring the capacity that be needed beyond 2020. So in fact, a lot of the things that are being looked at in 5G is an evolution of that densification via small cell. So when you'll go beyond 5G, you'll have small cell deployed every 10 meters. And when you effectively do that, you have got new challenges you need to solve. The backhaul is one of them, the coordination between all of them. You'll have to have a small cell that effectively work like ants, so they work together for solving a problem. So you'll have multiple communication from those small cells. So a lot of the learnings and the deployment things we're going through today will effectively be key learning things that will be then rolled out in the standard and in the 5G solution going forward. So if you don't have small cell, you won't need 5G. So small cell will have to happen, and it will be a key learning curve for the whole industry to move to 5G.
Well, thank you very much for your insight and experience. It was very good. Stephane Daeuble, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks a lot.